She lay perfectly still beneath the chandelier's cold light, a smear of blood across her neck like an unfinished necklace. The white lace gown clung to her body, torn at the shoulder, its hem soaked from where she collapsed near the minibar. For a moment, it looked as if she were merely sleeping, until you noticed her eyes. Open, empty, frozen. The hotel suite on the top floor of Berlin's Rose Palast had been decorated in creams and golds, with champagne chilling and rose petals scattered across the bed. But none of it mattered now. The room smelled of perfume and panic. The silence was a scream no one could hear. Detective Nina Rausch stood at the edge of the scene, gloved hands tucked behind her back. Her eyes didn't blink as she studied the body. She'd seen murders before, dozens, but this one carried a strange stillness, like walking into a dream that had soured. The victim couldn't have been more than 30, elegant, young, beautiful, dead. Behind her, a uniformed officer whispered nervously, "We got the call at 1:18 a.m. Guest on the 8th floor heard screaming. No signs of forced entry. The groom was found in the room. Alone." Nina turned. "Where is he now?" "In custody. Not resisting. Covered in blood. Just sitting." "Sitting." The officer nodded, his voice low. "By the window. Kept saying, 'I loved her. I swear I loved her.'" Nina stepped further into the room. One heel clicked softly against a piece of shattered glass near the vanity. Lipstick rolled beneath the dresser, uncapped, a vivid red. She crouched near the bride's hand, noticing the faint indentation on her finger. The ring was gone. She scanned the area. Near the bed, half tucked beneath a sheet, the gold wedding band glinted under the lamplight. There was no sign of a struggle beyond the torn gown and a cracked lamp. No weapons, no blood spatter, only her body, pale and unmarked save the bruising at her neck. This wasn't a rage killing. It was personal, controlled. A moment stretched too far. "Name?" Nina asked. "Elena Weber," came the reply. "Age, 31. Married just this morning. No priors. Nothing flagged. Everything clean." Nina rose and looked toward the balcony, where the curtains swayed with the breeze. The city lights twinkled below like nothing had happened. How many people were still out there, drinking, laughing, sleeping, unaware that inside the Rose Palast, love had curdled into violence? She felt a familiar twist in her stomach. This wasn't just a murder. This was a story waiting to unfold, secrets stacked beneath silence. The forensic team entered behind her, snapping gloves and unzipping kits. The flash of a camera lit the room like lightning. Elena's face caught the light for a fraction of a second, and Nina saw it. Not fear, resignation. As if the bride had known this ending before the ceremony even began. She turned to leave. "Bag the dress, carefully, and find her phone." One of the techs raised a brow. "No phone in the suite," Nina paused. "Then someone took it." As she walked down the hallway toward the elevator, the doors to room 1014 opened just behind her. Two officers led out the groom, tall, disheveled, his white shirt stained with blood, hands cuffed loosely behind him. Their eyes met for the briefest second. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Nina kept walking. Somewhere in her gut, she knew this wasn't just a wedding night gone wrong. It was the beginning of a nightmare. 6 months earlier, Berlin-Charlottenburg, a Thursday evening, the Phi. Gallery buzzed with the soft murmur of curated small talk, crystal glasses clinking gently in hand. Stark white walls bore experimental photography, blurred faces, ghost-like motion, long exposures of people caught between moments. The theme was titled, "Truth in the Unseen." Elena Weber stood by the edge of the room, sipping dry white, wine she didn't like. Her black dress was simple but elegant, the kind that let her blend in. Not too expensive, not too revealing. She wore her hair tucked behind her ear, just enough vulnerability to seem approachable, just enough polish to seem safe. It was an old habit, a practiced one. She wasn't there for the art. Across the room, Lucas Bauer had already noticed her. He wasn't the kind of man who usually noticed women. Not like this. Not immediately. He was too busy, too logical. But tonight, something about her drew him in. Maybe the way she kept staring at one photo in particular. A woman standing in a rainstorm, back turned to the camera, umbrella dropped at her feet. He drifted closer. "You like that one?" Eleanor blinked, startled, then smiled politely. "It feels honest." "Honest," she nodded. "She's not hiding from the rain. She's letting it ruin her." He studied her for a beat longer. "That's a bleak take." "That's Berlin," she said softly, before taking another sip of wine. Then, almost as an afterthought, "I'm Elena." "Lucas." They shook hands, but it lingered just a second too long. Something sparked. They had coffee the next morning. Wine turned into dinner 2 days later. By the end of the week, she was falling asleep in his bed, or pretending to. Lucas was everything Elena needed him to be. Kind, established, successful, and most importantly, not curious. He asked about her favorite books and her favorite songs. Never about her past, and she gave him just enough answers to keep the illusion intact. "I grew up in the South," she'd say, vague and clean. "My parents died when I was young." True, actually. No siblings. Just me. Lie. She told herself it wasn't manipulation. It was survival. Lucas, for his part, was smitten. He hadn't felt this way in years. Not since the accident that took his brother. Not since Berlin had started to feel like a city made entirely of ghosts. Elena was soft edges and warm laughter. She touched his face when he spoke. She listened. By the 3rd week, he introduced her to his colleagues. By the 5th, he gave her a key to his flat, and not once did she flinch when he mentioned his surname. Bauer. She knew it already. She had searched him before they ever met, found the gallery event through an old client of his, traced his professional presence down to the minute. She chose the dress to catch his eye, memorized enough of his architectural work to ask the right questions. Lucas Bauer was a man who believed in structure, order, trust, and that made him perfect. But there were moments she couldn't control, like when she'd wake up sweating, gripping the sheets too tightly, or when she flinched at a car backfiring in the street. Lucas noticed once, gently brushing her arm. "Eleanor, are you okay?" She forced a smile. "Just bad dreams. Sorry." He didn't press. He never did. She loved that about him. That night, while Lucas showered, Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. She pulled out her phone and opened a hidden folder of photos, most of them blurry, some just screen grabs of legal documents. At the bottom, a wedding photo. Not hers and Lucas's, another man, another time, a different ring. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but she didn't press it. Instead, she locked the phone, took a long drag, and whispered to the night. Just a little longer. The first message came on a Tuesday. No name, no number, just a text. "You're good at disappearing, Elena, but you're not gone." She stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. No reply. No reaction. Lucas was in the kitchen, humming as he made coffee. She could hear the comforting clink of ceramic and the slow, familiar drip of the French press. He was planning their weekend, something about hiking in Grunewald, something about getting away. She smiled when he brought her the mug, acted normal, but something inside her had shifted. Again. By Friday, there were 3 more messages. One included an old address. Another, a photo of a scar on someone's hand, a hand she once kissed every night before bed. The third one simply read, "Still wearing his name, are you?" She locked herself in the bathroom and vomited. That weekend, they didn't go hiking. Elena claimed she had a migraine. Lucas was sweet about it, tucking her into bed, making her soup, drawing the curtains. He kissed her forehead and told her to rest. But she didn't sleep. Instead, She sat on the floor of the dark hallway outside the bedroom, her phone glowing in her hand. She stared at her reflection in the black screen, pale, fragile, like a ghost, wearing someone else's face. She whispered his name only once that night. Jonas. The sound of it made her want to claw her skin off. They had been married for 5 years, not even a real wedding, just signatures and bruises. She was 22 and running from something else. Jonas was safety at first, then fire, then silence, then pain. When she left, she didn't just pack a bag. She buried a life. Fake documents, burner phones, new cities. She had thought Berlin was far enough, that Lucas, with his sweet eyes and steady hands, was far enough. But she had underestimated how deeply Jonas could rot his way into her new beginning. On Sunday, Eleanor burned the only remaining paper proof of that life. She waited until Lucas was asleep, then crept into the kitchen. She pulled the envelope from behind the spice rack. Inside, a German marriage certificate, a worn passport photo, and one handwritten letter she had never opened. She didn't want to know what it said. She lit the gas stove, held the edge of the paper to the flame, watched it curl into blackness. Smoke coiled toward the ceiling like a secret being released. She turned on the vent and cracked the window. As she watched the ashes fall into the sink, she saw something move outside, across the street, by the parked cars. A man, standing, staring up at their window. Her breath caught. She turned off the light and ducked behind the counter, her heart pounding so loud she could hear nothing else. After what felt like forever, she peeked again. He was gone, or had never been there at all. The next morning, Lucas found her on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, face drawn. "You're scaring me," he said softly. She smiled weakly. "Just tired." He leaned in to kiss her temple. "I was thinking," he began slowly, "what if we moved in together officially? Your place is too small anyway." Elena blinked. "You want me to live here? Full time?" "Why not? I already can't sleep when you're not next to me." Her throat tightened. Another lie. Another layer. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." Lucas smiled, kissed her again, and went inside to get dressed. Elena remained still. She watched the empty street, the trees, the parked cars, and somewhere, just barely audible over the quiet hum of morning, a phone buzzed. Let's not pretend this will end well. Before Lucas, before Berlin, before she learned how to disappear, there was Jonas. Jonas Kruger was not a monster at first. They met in Hamburg, in the stale back room of a failing travel agency where Eleanor worked part-time, fresh out of a shelter. She was 22, quiet, all edges and hollow laughter. Jonas was 30, confident, and just broken enough to seem safe. He brought her coffee once, then lunch, then flowers. He listened, or pretended to. "I see you," he said one night, touching her face like she was a puzzle only he could solve. "You don't have to run anymore," she believed him. They were married 4 months later. At first, the silence between them was warm. She liked how he filled space, how his voice steadied a room, how he knew things. He was never loud in public, never cruel in front of others, only when they were alone. The first slap came after she misplaced his wallet. He said it was stress, money, a bad day. She apologized. The second came when she asked about a woman who kept calling his phone. He called her paranoid, ungrateful. By the time he broke her phone against the wall during a snowstorm, she had learned not to ask questions, only to survive the answers. Jonas never left bruises where they could be seen. His cruelty was careful, whispered accusations, slow dismantling of her worth, isolation dressed up as love. "No one else will want you," he told her once, after she asked about leaving. She still remembers how calm he was when he said it. "You're used goods, damaged. I fixed you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. By the second year, she stopped dreaming. By the third, she stopped writing. Stories she once loved replaced by grocery lists and excuses. By the fourth, she stopped looking in mirrors. Then, one night, she found the folder. She wasn't snooping, just cleaning. Tucked behind the boiler, inside a rusted toolbox, a folder labeled RW inside, were photos. Dozens. Most were grainy surveillance-style pictures. A woman. Brunette. Mid-30s. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with a child. Notes in the margins. Times. Dates. License plates. Another woman he was watching. A woman who wasn't Eleanor. She confronted him. A quiet, "What is this?" while he was brushing his teeth. He didn't answer. Instead, he hit her so hard she blacked out. When she woke up, the folder was gone. He never spoke of it again. Neither did she. Eleanor began planning her escape not out of courage, but necessity. Jonas had grown, paranoid, unpredictable. He'd lose hours, go silent, talk to himself. Once, she caught him standing in the dark kitchen, just staring at her with a look she couldn't name. She knew the pattern. Men like him never just fall apart. They take someone down with them. So she disappeared. Bit by bit. She found an old contact who owed her a favor. A woman who worked in immigration processing. She saved cash in tea tins, created a false trail. On a rainy Thursday morning, while Jonas was out walking their dog, she walked into a train station with a forged ID and never looked back. The dog was the only thing she missed. Now, years later, she could feel his shadow stretching across her again. She hadn't spoken his name in so long it barely tasted real. But the texts, the photo, the man across the street, it could only be him. He had found her, not just found her, studied her again, planned, waited. And now, with Lucas sleeping beside her, with their wedding invitations already ordered, and a dress hidden in the back of her closet, the walls of her new life were beginning to crack. What scared her most wasn't the idea that Jonas might still love her. It was that he didn't. This time, she feared he hadn't come to win her back. He had come to ruin her. Back in Berlin, a hotel receptionist handed a man in a long black coat a small envelope. The man opened it without expression. Inside was a card with two names, Mr. and Mrs. Lucas Bauer. Check-in, August 8th. Honeymoon suite, floor 10. The man smiled, but it never reached his eyes. The morning sun lit Berlin like a blessing. Soft gold filtered through the windows of the bridal suite as Elena sat motionless in front of the mirror. Her hair was pinned, her makeup flawless, her dress a sheath of ivory lace, the kind of gown that made strangers gasp. But all she saw was a version of herself she no longer recognized. Behind her, Mira laughed lightly as she adjusted the veil. "You look like a dream, Lena, like someone out of a painting." Eleanor forced a smile. "Let's hope it doesn't end like a tragedy." Mira didn't catch the shift in her voice. No one did. Downstairs, Lucas paced by the fountain in the hotel. Courtyard, adjusting his tie for the third time. His best friend slapped him on the back. "Nervous?" "No, just excited," Lucas said. "I think." He meant it. At least, part of him did. The other part, the quieter, unspoken part, had started to feel a sliver of distance in Elena's eyes over the last week, like she was always somewhere else. But love is trusting, and he trusted her. He had to. The ceremony began at 3:01 p.m. sharp. The string quartet played something slow and romantic. The crowd, an elegant mix of Lucas's architect colleagues and Elena's carefully curated list of art world acquaintances, turned as the bride appeared at the end of the aisle. Gasps, phones raised. Lucas's breath caught. She walked like someone in a dream, head high, eyes far away. When they met at the altar, he whispered, "You look unreal." She didn't answer at first. Then finally, "So do you." They exchanged vows under a white arch draped in lilies. Everything about it was perfect, except her hands trembled as she slid the ring onto his finger. And someone in the crowd was watching, her too closely. Later, as guests mingled over wine and music, Elena stood alone near the balcony. Mira approached, handing her a glass of champagne. "You okay?" Elena nodded. "Yeah, it's a lot." "You don't have to pretend with me." Elena looked her friend in the eye, then quickly glanced away. "I'm fine." But Mira wasn't convinced. "Listen," she said gently. "If something's wrong, if you're scared of anything, I can help. You just have to say the word." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's nothing anyone can do." Before Mira could ask more, Eleanor's eyes fixed on something over her shoulder, or rather someone, a man, black coat, watching her from near the exit, just standing there. Jonas. She blinked, and he was gone, or never there at all. By midnight, the guests had thinned. The cake was cut. The speeches were done. Lucas took her hand and led her upstairs. The elevator ride was quiet. He kissed her shoulder. She leaned into him, but her body was stiff. In the honeymoon suite, he poured champagne while she stood by the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Elena," he said softly, "did today feel real to you?" She turned. "Why wouldn't it? I don't know. You just seem far away lately." She crossed the room and kissed him, long, deep, like an apology. "I'm here now," she whispered. They toasted. They danced barefoot to music from his phone. For a moment, it felt like maybe the worst had passed. But when Lucas asked her to sign the final part of their marriage registration papers, just a formality, she hesitated. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "Of course, just overwhelmed." He smiled and kissed her again. "We'll do it tomorrow. No pressure." She laughed, but her hands were still shaking. Later that night, Lucas fell asleep wrapped around her. She lay awake. Her wedding dress, now draped over the armchair, still smelled faintly of perfume. And underneath it, stuffed into her makeup bag, her phone buzzed one final time. "Enjoy tonight. It's the last thing you'll ever have that's real." She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and waited for morning. Lucas woke to the quiet glow of sunrise bleeding through the hotel curtains. The air was heavy with champagne, candle wax, and the faint sweetness of Elena's perfume lingering. On the sheets, she was in the bathroom, door cracked, humming quietly. Her voice was calm, light. For a brief moment, he believed everything was perfect. Then his phone buzzed. New message. Unknown sender. Subject line. "Ask her who she really belongs to." Lucas sat up, frowning. The message had no text, just an image file. He tapped it. The photo loaded slowly. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at. Grainy, poorly lit. Then it sharpened. A younger Eleanor, standing next to another man. A wedding photo. She was wearing a different dress, hair longer, smile tighter. But it was unmistakably her. And the man had his arm wrapped around her waist like they belonged to each other. The file name was chilling. Eleanor Weber, Kruger Wedding 2015. For a moment, Lucas couldn't breathe. Elena emerged a few minutes later, towel around her hair, face clean of makeup. She looked at peace. She looked like someone who had just survived the worst, but Lucas couldn't see her anymore. He saw the dress, the arm around her waist. "The lie, Elena," he said, his voice low. "Who is Jonas Kruger?" She froze mid-step. "What?" He stood, phone in hand. "I asked you a question." Her lips parted, but no sound came. "You told me everything. You told me you were alone. You told me you'd never been married." "I didn't," she whispered. "I didn't lie. I just couldn't tell you." "So it's true," Her silence was the only answer he needed. He tossed the phone onto the bed. "You let me marry you." "I didn't let you do anything. I love you, Lucas." "I do." "Then why hide this?" "Because he would have killed me if he knew where I was. I was trying to stay alive. I didn't think—" "No," Lucas said, backing away. "You didn't think I deserved the truth. Lucas, please." He raised his hand, not to strike her, but to make her stop speaking. "How long did you think this would last? How long were you going to pretend I was your first, your only?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was trying to build a future, something new. I didn't plan for this." "For you?" Lucas laughed bitterly. "You mean us? Me? The fool?" "No, I mean I didn't plan to fall in love with you." The silence between them stretched like a wire about to snap. Elena moved closer, trembling. "Please, just listen. He was violent, dangerous. I ran. I had no one. I built this life from nothing. You were the only good thing that ever happened to me." Lucas stared at her, jaw tight. "Did you even file for divorce?" She hesitated. That hesitation was the final blow. "Get out. Lucas, get out." She stepped back, shaking, grabbing her dress from the chair. "I'll explain everything, I swear." But he wasn't listening. He was already somewhere else. Inside the image, that smile, that dress, that lie, wrapped in white. As the door slammed shut behind her, Lucas sat down on the bed. His chest heaved, hands clenched. Then, slowly, he picked up the phone. He scrolled down to the message again. A second file had been sent. He hesitated, then hit play. Her voice filled the room. "Not from tonight. From years ago. If anyone ever finds out, I'm finished. No one would ever forgive me if they knew what I really did." The recording ended, and Lucas finally understood. This wasn't just a lie. It was betrayal carved deep, and he was holding the knife. He sat across from Detective Nina Rausch, eyes bloodshot, knuckles scabbed. The interrogation room buzzed faintly. A flickering fluorescent bulb, the low hum of the security camera above. Lucas Bauer didn't ask for a lawyer. "I don't care what happens to me," he said. "Just let me tell it right." Nina nodded once. Then she pressed record. "She came back around midnight," Lucas began. "I thought she'd run. I hoped she had, to be honest. But I heard the key turn and there she was, still in that dress. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Or maybe I looked at her like she was. I asked her one last time, was it true? Was everything a lie? She didn't answer, just sat down at the edge of the bed and said, 'Do you want to hear everything, or do you want to stay angry?' She told him about Jonas, the marriage, the abuse, the fear. She didn't cry, not right away. Her voice was flat, like someone reading their own obituary. He didn't interrupt, not once, until she said one thing he couldn't unhear. 'I was going to tell you, after the wedding.' That broke something in him. After, he had snapped. After you took my name. After you smiled through the vows and kissed me in front of everyone I love. I needed time, she whispered. You needed time to erase me, Elena. I needed time to save myself, she screamed. That was the first time he'd seen her truly lose control. She stood, pacing, hands in her hair, barefoot on the cold marble. I never wanted this to end this way, she said. I just wanted peace. I just wanted to feel safe for once. You were safe, Lucas said. She shook her head. Not with secrets. Then why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have loved me. He blinked. Maybe not. And just like that, her body folded. She sank to the floor, sobbing, silent at first, then louder. Raw, I ruined everything, she cried. I ruin everything. He sat on the bed, elbows on knees, staring at her, not moving. I should have died years ago, she whispered. Would have been easier for everyone. Something in him snapped. Not anger, not rage, something colder. "I don't know why I stood up," Lucas said to Nina now. "I just remember walking over, kneeling in front of her, telling her to stop. She kept crying, kept saying, 'Please, just stop looking at me like that.' And I said, 'I don't remember what I said.'" He closed his eyes. "I just remember my hands. They were on her arms at first, trying to pull her up. She resisted, pulled back, shoved at his chest, then on her shoulders, then her throat. Not hard, at first," she gasped. "Lucas, stop." But he didn't. "Have you ever felt someone stop breathing?" Lucas whispered. Nina didn't answer. "It doesn't happen all at once. First the fight goes, then the sound, then they just stop being there." He buried his face in his hands. "I didn't mean to. I didn't. I just wanted her to know what it felt like, to not have control, to be the one breaking." There was silence in the room now, thick and choking. Nina reached forward and shut off the recorder. "Where's the wedding ring?" she asked quietly. "I put it on the nightstand," Lucas said. "I didn't want to keep it. I thought maybe someone should remember she was loved, even if it ended like this." Later, as officers walked Lucas down the corridor in handcuffs, Nina remained in the room alone. The confession sat like lead in her stomach. She had seen crimes of passion before, quick bursts of rage, drunken accidents, mistaken identity. But this was grief weaponized. Truth, twisted into violence. Love, strangled into silence. She stared through the one-way mirror for a long time, and when she finally stood, she whispered to herself, "There's something missing." Detective Nina Rausch stood over the crime scene again, 2 days later. The honeymoon suite was quiet now, stripped of guests, stripped of warmth, just the echo of what happened. The dress had been tagged, the champagne glasses dusted, the body long removed. But something about the story didn't sit right. Lucas Bauer had confessed. Clearly, calmly, tearfully. And yet, something itched at the edge of Nina's mind like a thread she wasn't ready to pull. Back at headquarters, the forensic reports had come in. She flipped through them now under fluorescent light. Time of death, between 12:10 and 12:40 a.m. Fingerprints, Lucas's all over the glassware, the bedpost, the bathroom sink. DNA, Eleanor's under Lucas's nails. Expected no defensive wounds, no signs of prolonged struggle. But then, a line circled in red. Unidentified partial print on inside balcony door handle. Nina frowned. Could it be hers? She asked the forensics tech. Possibly, but it's smudged. Not enough ridge. Detail for confirmation. Doesn't match Lucas. Was the door open when patrol arrived? No, closed, but unlocked. Nina stared at the photo of the handle, barely visible under the dusting powder, a half-moon ridge. Not enough to identify, but enough to suggest someone had left that way. She reviewed the hallway footage again. Lucas had been seen entering the suite at 11:52 p.m. Elena arrived 11 minutes later. Neither exited until the officers came. No one else was captured coming or going from the hallway, but there was no camera on the balcony, no angle of the fire escape that ran behind the hotel. She picked up the second report from forensics on Elena's phone, which had finally been recovered. It had been wiped completely, factory reset. No photos, no contacts, no messages, just one draft email still sitting unsent in her outbox. Subject: if anything happens to me. His name is Jonas Kruger. He said he would find me. He always said that. He told me once that death was the only way I could be his forever. If I disappear, if I die, don't believe the story they tell you. The timestamp, 12:03 a.m. 7 minutes before the estimated time of death. Nina leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. Was Lucas telling the truth, or had someone else been there? Someone who made sure Lucas would take the fall. She thought of the voice in the confession room, broken, but honest, or at least desperate enough to sound that way. But what if Lucas hadn't killed out of rage? What if he was being framed, or worse? What if he wasn't alone when it happened? That night, Nina returned to the Rose Palace Hotel, this time alone. She stepped onto the 10th floor balcony of the honeymoon suite. The street below was quiet, normal, but 3 floors down, a small service ledge connected to the fire escape. Easy enough to climb for someone experienced, the kind of path you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. She stared down at it, wind brushing her face. Then she checked the security logs again. There was a door near the service kitchen that had been opened at 12:48 a.m., 4 minutes before the screaming started, by someone with a master key. Nina stepped back inside. Her fingers trembled as she wrote the next words in her case file. The timeline doesn't add up. It was supposed to be open and shut. A man strangles his new bride in a fit of betrayal. The motive? Deception. A hidden marriage. A past full of secrets. The confession was clean, almost poetic. The public devoured it, but Detective Nina Rausch couldn't let it go. Something about the timing, the phone, the smudged fingerprint, the unsent email Elena wrote moments before her death. She couldn't stop hearing it. If anything happens to me, don't believe the story they tell you. Nina requested everything she could on Jonas Kruger. Court records, marriage certificates, financial logs, anything Elena may have buried. Most of it had been sealed. Domestic violence complaints that never went to trial. A hospital admission under another name. And then nothing. Jonas had simply vanished 4 years ago. No credit activity, no address, no employer. As if the man had dissolved. But then she found something. A single transaction on a prepaid card traced to a florist. Shop 2 blocks from the hotel. The purchase had been made the day before the wedding. Lily's, Elena's favorite. The order was made under the name R. Weber, Elena's mother's maiden name. It was the same alias Elena once used to flee him. Whoever placed that order knew too much. Nina pulled the surveillance footage from the flower shop. The system was old, the resolution grainy, but she froze the frame as a man in a black coat and baseball cap leaned across the counter, cash in hand. The face was tilted, down, almost invisible, but the posture, the shape of the jaw, she had seen it before. Jonas, or someone pretending not to be him. That same figure had appeared outside the hotel 2 nights before the murder. Then again, near the gallery where Eleanor first met Lucas. Each time, never close, enough to speak, just watching. Nina checked police databases again. Jonas Kruger's official status, missing, not presumed dead. A ghost. But ghosts don't send flowers. She sat in her office well past midnight, lights low, combing through hotel access logs. Staff keycard usage, elevators, kitchen doors. Nothing. Looked unusual until she spotted a line entry on the night of the murder. 48 a.m. The rear service hallway door opened for 13 seconds by a key registered to maintenance. No report filed, no call for service. She called the hotel manager. No maintenance was scheduled that night. So who used the key and why? 13 minutes after Elena's time of death, would someone sneak out through a service exit? Unless they were watching. Unless they were waiting. Unless Lucas Bauer hadn't killed his wife alone. Nina returned to the crime scene one final time. This time, she stood not at the body's side, but in the shadowed corner behind the minibar, where the angle of the bathroom mirror offered a perfect line of sight to the balcony door. Someone could have stood there. Someone did. Because that smudged fingerprint wasn't Lucas's, and it wasn't Eleanor's. It belonged to someone else. She requested a deep forensic scan, partial ridge match, even degraded. 3 hours later, it came back. Match found. Subject: Jonas Kruger. Deceased. Status: unconfirmed. Active warrant: domestic assault. There it was. Jonas had been in the room. And maybe, just maybe, he was still in Berlin. Nina closed the file slowly. The truth wasn't what the papers had printed. Lucas may have strangled his bride, but someone else was there, watching it happen, and possibly orchestrating it. Jonas Kruger hadn't vanished. He had molted, shed his identity like a dead skin, and slipped beneath the system. No social media, no fingerprints in the last 4 years. But people like Jonas don't just disappear. They hide in plain sight. Nina knew the type. A man like that doesn't stop wanting control. He just changes where he exerts it. She started from the flower shop. From there, a trail began to unravel. Cash transactions, burner phones, low-rent hostels paid in cash. Each time, the name changed slightly. J. Crew, K. Ronas, R. Weber. But the pattern was always the same. Never a long stay, never a real address. Always within a 20-kilometer radius of Elena. He had been orbiting her like a planet of grief. Waiting. The florist described him perfectly. Polite, quiet, smelled like cigarettes and aftershave. Said he left a note with the flowers but asked her to destroy it once the arrangement was made. She hadn't. Nina unfolded the slip of paper now inside. An evidence bag, 5 words, written in block capitals. I never forgot our vows. There was no mistaking it now. He hadn't come back to win Elena. He'd come back to finish what she ran from. Nina requested the hotel's rooftop footage, a camera few even knew existed. It overlooked the fire escape, grainy and unreliable. But at 12:46 a.m. on the night of the wedding, it caught a blurred figure in a dark coat moving down the metal stairs. 2 minutes later, Lucas and Elena were arguing in the suite. Another 2 minutes. The screaming started. He didn't kill her, but he made sure someone else did. By then, Nina was no longer certain Lucas was guilty of murder. Only guilt. A manipulated man. A heartbroken one. A man who walked into a trap already laid. But there was one thing still unaccounted for. The recording. The voice message Lucas received. The one that sealed the fury in his chest. Nina had it analyzed. Audio engineers confirmed something chilling. The waveform showed signs of compression editing. 2 separate audio files spliced. Elena had never said those words in a single sentence. In fact, she may not have said them at all. Not in that context. It had been doctored, engineered, planted. Jonas didn't need to put his hands around Elena's throat. He only needed to point Lucas in the direction and light the fuse. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. Nina's hands trembled as she pieced it together. Lucas wasn't innocent, but he hadn't come to that room planning to kill. Jonas had been in the room before, set the stage, left the messages, and vanished down a fire escape like a ghost with blood on his breath. There was one last place to check. An abandoned building Lucas had renovated 5 years ago, left incomplete after a funding pullout. The place had no cameras, no neighbors, no alarms, just stone, darkness, and silence. Police found a mattress, cigarette butts, a burner phone, and on the wall, dozens of photos taped in a grid. Photos of Elena, different hair, different cities. One of her holding hands with Lucas near the gallery where they met. He had watched it all, stalked her, planned this for years. The phone was still warm. Jonas had been there, hours before, maybe less. But he was gone now. Gone again. They searched the building top to bottom. Nothing. Just a draft of cold air and the bitter weight of justice delayed. Nina stood alone in the dust and shadow, staring at a single torn picture on the floor. Elena, asleep in a park, sun on her face, peaceful, unaware. She picked it up, turned it over. A message was written on the back in blue ink. You can't take her from me twice. The case wasn't closed. The story wasn't finished, and somewhere, out in the city of stone and shadow, the man who had haunted Elena's past was haunting someone new now. 3 months later, Berlin had moved on. The news cycle had faded. The public lost interest after the trial. Lucas Bauer was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The court acknowledged his confession, his remorse, and the psychological manipulation involved. 7 years, maybe 5, with good behavior. But justice never really arrived. Not for Elena, and not for the woman who now wore her face. Her name was Sophie Jaeger, a schoolteacher from Potsdam. 32, brown hair, laughed easily, liked black coffee and slow jazz. She met him at a corner bookstore. He'd dropped a copy of Anna Karenina, made a joke about tragic women, and smiled with soft eyes. They went for coffee, then dinner, then weekends together. He told her his name was Konrad Meyer, a civil engineer working freelance. Quiet life, no family. He asked questions but gave little, always listening, always watching. After 6 weeks, he showed her a cabin in the woods outside the city, said he bought it for the quiet, said it was a place to escape the noise of everything. Sophie thought he was a little lonely, maybe a little old-fashioned, but kind, gentle, the kind of man who opened doors, the kind of man who remembered how she took her tea. One night, while lying under thick blankets beside the fireplace, he asked her something strange. "Do you believe people can be reborn?" She laughed. "In like a spiritual way?" "No. I mean, after you've been broken, can someone become new again?" She thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, but only if they stop pretending they weren't broken in the first place." He stared at her for a long time after that. Didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. Then he kissed her hand and said, "You remind me of someone." 2 weeks later, she agreed to move in. That same week, he removed a photo from the wall of his hidden room, the last photo of Elena sleeping on a park bench, and placed it into a drawer. He taped a new photo in its place, Sophie, laughing, her head thrown back, a scarf around her neck, his new bride. The cycle had begun again. Back in Berlin, Nina Rausch sat at her desk with a cold cup of coffee and an open case file she couldn't close. They never found him, not officially. Interpol flagged a few sightings, one in Prague, one in Krakow. A man matching Jonas's description, always alone, always just passing through. But he was always gone before anyone could act, a ghost with unfinished business. Nina had kept the message Elena wrote, the unsent. 1. She printed it, framed it, and kept it behind her files. "If anything happens to me, don't believe the story they tell you." She looked at it every morning, like a vow. Some days, she felt like she failed Elena twice. First by believing Lucas too quickly, then by not catching the man who pulled the strings. But the truth was worse. Elena wasn't his first bride, and Sophie wouldn't be his last. That kind of man didn't want love. He wanted ownership, devotion he could control, obedience he could suffocate. He wanted silence. Sophie still had time. Maybe, if she noticed the warning signs, if someone reached her. Nina had already filed an anonymous report, a small attempt to plant doubt. But reports didn't stop men like Jonas, only exposure did. She knew this wouldn't end with a courtroom. It would end when someone finally broke the pattern. Someone who didn't freeze, who didn't flinch, who didn't look away. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and headed into the rain. Because somewhere, not far from where it had all started, a woman was laughing softly in a cabin in the woods, and a man was watching her like a memory he didn't deserve to keep. Berlin had grown quiet. The streets were slick with rain, neon reflections blurring into puddles, like memories that refused to settle. Detective Nina Rausch still carried the weight of what had happened. Eleanor, Lucas, Sophie, names she could never forget. Faces that haunted her dreams. And yet, somewhere far from the city, Jonas Kruger was already moving again. He rented a small apartment in Leipzig under the name Matthias Klein, paid in cash. No electricity bill in his name, no phone linked to him. A man living in the shadows, invisible by design. But he had a purpose, a pattern. There was a photo pinned to the corkboard in his living room. Sophie, laughing, holding her scarf around her neck. He stared at it until the edges of the photo softened, until her smile felt like a memory he could reach into. And then he added another image. A woman he had noticed in a cafe near the university. Brown hair tied back, reading a novel in a leather jacket. She had laughed at something on her phone, unaware that someone was watching. Her name, he discovered, was Clara Hoffman, 27, single, living alone. The thrill was familiar, quiet, precise, calculated. He traced her patterns. Morning coffee at 7, walk along the canal at 9, a jog in the park at 6. Always alone, always predictable, always ripe for someone like him to insert himself into her orbit. Jonas had learned from mistakes. He would not rush. He would not strike too soon. First, he would enter her life carefully. A kind word here, a helpful gesture there. He would become indispensable before the line blurred. Before fear replaced affection. Before obsession turned lethal. Back in Berlin, Nina reviewed a map of all his known sightings. From Prague to Krakow, Potsdam to Leipzig, there was a pattern, a silent orbit. She could feel it, the gravitational pull of his obsession. She had filed alerts to local authorities, but the man was clever, always moving, always just out of reach. The kind of predator that didn't need to chase because he didn't hunt. He waited, and when the moment came, the victim ran right into him. The thought made her stomach twist. She remembered Elena, the wedding gown, the perfume, Lucas's confession. She remembered Sophie laughing in the cabin, unaware that someone had already planned her fate. Somewhere, Jonas was smiling, not a cruel smile, not one of triumph, something colder, a calculation, a satisfaction in preparation, in the slow unspooling of what he believed was inevitable. Nina pulled her coat tighter around herself. Rain spattered the windshield as she drove through the empty streets. She couldn't stop thinking about Clara, how she had no idea, how easily a life could be redirected, how fragile trust was in the hands of someone like him. She reached for her phone. Local police in Leipzig had been alerted anonymously. She sent the details. Unusual activity, potential threat, signs of a person who had already destroyed lives, names, dates, photos. Every scrap of evidence she could find. But even as she did, she knew the truth. Jonas Kruger wasn't afraid of police. He wasn't afraid of the law. He had evaded it for years because he understood that fear was a tool, and he wielded it with precision. And now, with Clara, the game had begun again. A fresh bride, a new canvas. He would not make the same mistakes he had before. He had learned patience, manipulation, and the art of control. And the city, with its quiet streets and blind trust, would provide him cover. Nina pressed her hands to the steering wheel. Somewhere, far from Berlin, a woman was smiling. She was unaware that the shadow of a man who had haunted 2 others was already circling her life, and the pattern would repeat. Because Jonas Kruger didn't seek love. He sought possession, and in his world, a bride was never just a wife. She was a puzzle, a prize, a story that always ended the same way, with silence.